was going to start by saying how envious I am of you all today, and then I'll be ending probably with an apology. But to start with the envy, I'm really envious because of the great program that you guys are involved with here. The really structured space to explore with your supportive teachers the state of the world, why it is the way it is, and to imagine a better world, the world we want, and to begin to think about how to create that world. In my day, we had to rely a bit more, even than you do, on just individual teachers. There wasn't the same structured programs. But we were lucky, and I was lucky at least, in that we had those teachers in my school, often in religion class, who helped us open our eyes to the world around us and to engage critically with that world. So I'm a campaigner now. I work for Friends of the Earth, which is a 2 million strong network of activists around the world in 76 different countries. And our vision is of a just world where people and nature thrive. That's the world we want to see. But we have discovered over the last 10, 20 years that there's one particular central large obstacle to that, which in a sense wasn't what we started out looking at. It wasn't something that we went looking to be involved in, but it came to us, and that is climate change. But as soon as you start talking about climate change, it often gets very abstract. You're talking about an invisible gas called CO2 that we release when we burn fossil fuels. It's about parts per million in the atmosphere. It's about degrees of warming, and you can get very lost very quickly in a thicket of somewhat abstract things. I want to try and make it more tangible today before I talk about how we get to that world we want. But just one moment on that issue of the warming world. You may have heard that the goal we all have is that the world shouldn't warm by more than 2 degrees above what the average temperature was before the Industrial Revolution. But that doesn't sound like a lot. I mean, it's nice and sunny out there today, but actually it'd be nicer if it was 2 degrees warmer. When we go on holidays, we want it to be 5, 10 degrees warmer than it is in Ireland. But really we're talking about a measure of the energy in the atmosphere. So the average temperature is about 14 degrees across the globe. And if you think about having a fever or a high temperature as a child, the difference of 2 degrees is quite significant. So 37 is normal, 2 degrees is a fever. But actually at the moment globally we're on track for between a 4 to 6 degrees rise in global temperatures. But to try to make it more tangible, I want to talk about 2 things. I want to talk about water and I want to talk about fossil fuels. And with water, what climate change is causing is too much of it or too little of it. We're seeing already, with just 1 degree of global warming, a little bit less, we're seeing huge impacts. We're seeing more flooding in Ireland. We've seen, on a number of occasions in Dublin over the last 5 years, a month's rainfall in 24 hours. We saw huge floods in Cork. We've seen floods in the Midlands. We've seen the storms on the west coast last winter that caused massive flooding along the west coast. So we're seeing a real risk to Ireland itself, although we will be one of the least affected. One of the issues of justice in climate change is that those who've done least to cause it are being hit first and hit hardest. But again, in the rich world, we're seeing one of the longest ever droughts in California, which is the 8th largest economy in the world, and which is jeopardizing a lot of their industries now, as well as the lifestyles of what is one of the richest places on earth. But more pertinently for a conference about justice today and the world we want, climate change is already disrupting the rains in Africa, whereas eking a living from the soil, as many people do in Africa, is very precarious. But now you don't know when the rains are going to come, so you don't know when to sow. You might sow now and the rains don't come, so the seeds don't germinate and they die in the ground. You might sow now and the rains come in of a sudden, as we're seeing here more intensely, and wash away the seeds. So what was already a precarious living is now being made all the more difficult by climate change. In Bangladesh, 1/3 of the population live less than 1 metre above sea level. And 1 metre is probably at the low end of the sea level rise we will see this century because of climate change that we're already locked into. So 1/3 of the population of the 150 million in Bangladesh will be displaced by that climate change. Probably anyway, but at least if we don't take real action now. Over 1 billion people, 1.3 billion people, depend for the fresh drinking water they use on the glaciers in the Himalayas, melting a little bit during the summer and replenishing the rivers, and then melting less in winter and again each year. But because of global warming and climate change, those glaciers are retreating, and over time will give less of the fresh water we need. Climate change is here, and the change is coming anyway, whether we like it or not. And our choice is actually between managing that change, containing it, or else failing to act and facing much bigger disruption down the line to our lives and our livelihoods, not just in the poor world or in the global south, but here in the north. So the good news is we can do this. We already have the technology, we already are most of it, that we need to switch from a fossil fuel dependent world to one that is based on renewable energy and on the sun and on wind and on other forms of renewable energy to still power our lives. But it isn't happening. And that's what, before I finish, I want to look at why that is and what we can do about it. 50 years ago, JFK, the US president, launched the moonshot, the plan to be in the moon within 7 years. And at the time, scientists thought he was mad. The technology didn't exist to get there. But because politicians set that goal, the resources and the expertise and the science was marshalled to achieve it. And a man was set foot on the moon within 7 years. Now the opposite's happening. We're seeing scientists saying we have 7 years to act on climate change, to really make emissions start coming down around the world. We have the technology, but it's going to be a big change. And politicians are saying, oh, I don't know, it's too hard, we can't do it, and are not putting in place the earth shot we need, the marshalling of resources and energy to actually achieve a livable planet for all of us for the future. Because the difference between 2 degrees of warming and 4 degrees is essentially human civilization. It's within that parameters that human civilization has thrived. The World Bank has said, not the most radical institution, that at 4 degrees of global warming, we may only be able to sustain 1 billion people on the planet by the end of the century. So why aren't our politicians acting? For 20 years, they've been discussing climate change at conferences like the one in Paris and looking as to how to contain our emissions. But they haven't been talking about fossil fuels and how the burning of them increases the emissions, or how we might need to leave them in the ground. And why? Well, this is where we're getting to the nub of the issue. The fossil fuel industry is the most powerful, most profitable industry that has ever existed on this planet. And they have a vested interest in us not acting, in us not leaving the fossil fuels in the ground. And by vested interest, I mean they have money at stake. The latest calculations are between 60 and 80% of all the fossil fuels we already know about, that are proven, that are on the books of companies who trade in them and who extract them and sell them, 60 to 80% have to stay in the ground if we're to have a good shot, a good earth shot, at a 2 degree warming and no more. That's worth $20 trillion. That's already on the books of those oil and gas companies. They don't want us to leave it there. So in the face of that obstructionism, our political leaders are failing. They're failing to act. They're failing you. And here's the apology. For the last 25 years of climate talks, our generation has failed your generation. We are frying your future. The good news is, though, that your generation is not failing. They are taking action and they're building a movement for change. But here's the thing. We don't any longer expect our leaders to deliver the change we need. They may get a deal in Paris, but it will be too weak to do everything we need. And even if it's a good deal, we still need to keep those fossil fuels in the ground. And we will need to act together in order to achieve that. So a movement is building around the world, and it is being driven by young people like you. It's a movement for a fossil-free future. And what I want to say to you this morning is, don't be afraid to join that movement, because whatever the world we want is, and you're touching on lots of themes today, it depends on us getting off our addiction to fossil fuels. So it's your future at stake. It's time for you to take it back. Thank you.